Christopher Moltisanti is scary for the same reason a loaded gun is scary even when it's sitting on a table. It's not just that it can kill you, it's that you can't tell when it's going to go off. In The Sopranos, plenty of guys are violent, but most of them have patterns. They're businessmen about it, they do dirt for money, for policy, for status, for revenge that's been approved. Christopher is violent too, but the difference is his violence is personal. It comes from a place that's always raw. Pride, shame, addiction, insecurity, love, anger, all mixed together, and then handed a weapon, a crew, and the permission structure of the mafia. That combo makes him dangerous in a way that feels less predictable than the older guys, and that unpredictability is what makes people around him tense, even when he's smiling. When we meet Christopher early on, he isn't a polished gangster. He's still a kid trying to act like a man. He wants to be respected right now, not later, not after paying his dues, and that impatience is a warning sign. The show constantly puts him in situations where he feels small, dismissed, or laughed at, and you can see how badly he can't tolerate it. That's the first layer of his danger. He treats disrespect like an emergency. A normal person might stew. A normal criminal might file it away for later. Christopher often reacts in the moment because the moment is where he's trying to prove who he is. That's why Christopher's early violence hits so hard. It's not framed like some complicated strategic move. It's impulsive, showy, and sometimes sloppy, which ironically makes it scarier. A careful person is dangerous too, but you can predict what they want. With Chris, the trigger can be embarrassing you, challenging him, making him feel like he's failing, even just being in the wrong place when his mood flips. He's a guy who's always auditioning for a role in his own head. Real gangster, real man, real earner, real successor. And when he thinks he's blowing the audition, he lashes out. The second layer is that he genuinely likes violence as a language. Not in a cartoon way, but in a learned, cultural way where violence becomes his most fluent skill. Christopher isn't the smartest guy in a room. He's not the most diplomatic. He isn't a natural politician like Silvio, and he doesn't have Tony's ability to read a room and manipulate it. But he can intimidate, he can explode, he can be fearless, and he can follow through. In their world, that's currency. Every time violence solves a problem for him, it teaches him that violence is reliable. So two keeps the free keeps so free too, so reaching for it because it works faster than patience and it demands less emotional maturity than negotiation. And then there's the obvious accelerator, drugs, and alcohol. Addiction doesn't just make Christopher weaker. It makes him more chaotic. He becomes unreliable with time, money, loyalty, and memory, which is already bad in a criminal life. But for a violent person, intoxication strips away the thin layer that keeps them calculating. It turns the maybe into why not. It makes anger feel righteous and danger feel distant. That's what makes scenes with Christopher feel like they can turn at any second. With some guys, you know the rules. With Christopher high or drunk, even Christopher doesn't know the rules anymore. What's also important is how much he wants approval, especially from Tony. A lot of Christopher's life is a loop of trying to impress Tony, failing, getting scolded, then trying even harder. Tony is a father figure, a boss, and a judge. Christopher takes Tony's disappointment as humiliation, and he takes Tony's praise like oxygen. That emotional dependence matters because Christopher's violence often becomes a performance. He wants to be seen as capable, as tough, as somebody who can be trusted with serious work. So when he feels he's being treated like a child, he overcorrects. Overcorrection in his world means going harder than necessary. Hitting someone when a warning would do, pulling a gun when a threat would do, making an example when it's not worth the heat. That's why his early reputation forms the way it does. He's not just a soldier. He's the kind of soldier who's trying to make a point. The scene at the bakery is a perfect snapshot of Christopher's brand of scary. It's such a small situation, such a petty frustration, and yet he turns it into violence because he can't tolerate being treated as unimportant. It's not even about the pastry. It's about you don't get to ignore me. That psychology is poison because it means the everyday world can become a battlefield in his head, and when someone like that is armed and backed by a criminal organization, the danger spills outside the intended targets. As the seasons move forward, Christopher becomes more legit within the crew. He's made, he earns, he's trusted with more, and you'd expect that to stabilize him. In a normal career, promotion brings confidence. With Christopher, it brings pressure. Now he's not just pretending. Now he has to deliver. He has to be a real earner. He has to live up to the name he demanded. That's when his insecurity gets louder, because the stakes are higher and his weaknesses become harder to hide. If he fails as a soldier, he gets mocked. If he fails as a made guy, he gets replaced or worse. If he fails as Tony's protege, he loses the one thing he thinks gives his life meaning. That pressure feeds into his private life, and that's another core part of why he's scary. He's most dangerous to the people closest to him. In public, Christopher can sometimes keep it together because he's playing a role. At home, the role slips. The relationship with Adriana shows this clearly. Christopher can be loving, needy, even gentle sometimes. But he's also controlling, suspicious, and capable of serious violence when he feels threatened. And the threat doesn't have to be real, it just has to feel real to him. The idea of being embarrassed, cheated on, laughed at, or abandoned hits him like a direct attack on his identity. So he reacts like it's war. This is where the show is brutally honest about a certain type of man. Christopher doesn't hit because he's calm and strategic. He hits because he's emotionally cornered, and he refuses to be the smaller person. He needs to feel dominance immediately. That's what makes domestic violence in this story so disturbing. It's not packaged as the mob life. It's packaged as a personal flaw that the mob life enables. And for someone like Adriana, it means living with a man whose love and rage share the same address. Even when he apologizes, the apology doesn't erase the fact that he's capable of turning physical. It just proves the cycle. At the same time, Christopher has an ego that keeps getting fed by the lifestyle. He wants the perks. He wants respect. He wants to be taken seriously. He also wants to be an artist, a writer, an outsider who gets to be special. That clash makes him unstable. He can't fully commit to being a regular guy, and he can't fully accept being a cog in Tony's machine. So he's always restless. Restless men with guns are dangerous because they start looking for reasons to act. Something always has to happen. Someone always has to pay. Some moment always has to prove something. The show also makes Christopher scary by showing how easily he can cross lines without fully processing it. He'll do something extreme and then, later, act like other people are overreacting. That's not just criminal entitlement. It's a kind of emotional numbness. When violence is your job and your coping mechanism, your sense of normal warps. And Christopher's sense of normal is warped early. He's seen dead bodies, he's killed, he's been shot at, he's watched friends die, he's watched betrayals unfold. Over time, that hardens him in weird ways. He can still be sensitive, even sentimental, but he's also desensitized to consequences. He'll ruin lives and then focus on whether he feels disrespected in the conversation afterward. Another thing that makes Christopher frightening is that he's not purely evil, which sounds backwards, but it matters. A purely evil character becomes predictable. Christopher isn't predictable because he has real human reactions. Sometimes he's generous. Sometimes he's insecure and honest about it. Sometimes he's desperate for connection. That makes people around him drop their guard. They see the human side and think they can reason with him, or calm him down, or appeal to his heart. But when his switches flip, that human side doesn't protect you. It can actually make him more volatile, because now he's reacting from emotion rather than cold calculation. If you're dealing with a cold person, you negotiate. If you're dealing with a wounded person who has power, you're gambling. His danger also comes from how he handles status. Christopher has a constant fear that everyone sees him as small, stupid, replaceable. That fear makes him obsessed with being taken seriously. You see it in how he talks, how he carries himself, how he tries to sound smarter than he is, how he can't let a joke slide. In a normal setting, that's just insecurity. In the mob setting, insecurity becomes aggression because the culture teaches him that backing down equals weakness, and weakness gets you disrespected, robbed, or killed. So he becomes the guy who doesn't back down even when backing down would be wise. That's why Christopher's violence often escalates beyond what the situation requires. When he's challenged, he doesn't just want to win. He wants to dominate. He wants the other person to feel regret. He wants the story told later to make him look like the bigger monster. Older guys might avoid unnecessary heat because they think long-term. Christopher thinks short-term and emotional moments. He doesn't always see tomorrow when his pride is bleeding today. And you can't feel safe around someone who values winning the moment over surviving the month. Then you add the fact that Christopher is competent enough to be a real threat. He isn't a clown. He can plan. He can stalk a target. He can use a gun without hesitation. He can intimidate with his posture and his voice. He can read fear. A lot of violent people are dangerous because they're reckless, but they're also incompetent. Christopher is reckless and capable, which is a worse mix. He can do real damage and he can get away with it for long stretches because the organization shields him and because he's not totally stupid. He knows when to shut up. He knows when to lie. He knows the basics of how to make a problem disappear. That shield is another huge part of why he's scary. Christopher is not just one angry man. He's one angry man backed by a system that discourages consequences. Civilians can't call his boss. They can't get an apology that means anything. Even if they call the cops aren't dealing with a regular assault case. They're dealing with a connected criminal who has friends, lawyers, and intimidation. Christopher walks through life with a kind of invisible force field, and he knows it. That knowledge changes how a person behaves. It makes them bolder. It makes them crueler. It makes them less afraid of losing. You also start to see, as the story goes on, that Christopher carries resentment like a second spine. He resents being used. He resents being treated as lesser. He resents Tony's control, he resents the hypocrisy of the older guys judging him while they break their own rules. Resentment isn't just a feeling for Christopher, it's fuel. When he's resentful, he looks for an outlet. If he can't punch up, he punches sideways or down. That's a very specific kind of dangerous because it means the victim isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's whoever is nearest when he needs to feel power again. His brief attempts at sobriety also add to the sense of danger because they show how hard he's fighting himself. When he's trying to stay clean, you can feel him gripping the edges of his own life. He becomes irritable, sensitive, paranoid, and sometimes morally superior in a way that makes him isolate. Isolation is risky for him because when Christopher feels alone, he becomes more self-pitying and more likely to relapse, and relapse is when he becomes most erratic. The show doesn't treat relapse as a single event. It treats it like a landslide that takes people with it. By the time you get to the later seasons, Christopher's scariness shifts. Early on, he's scary because he's a hothead trying to prove himself. Later, he's scary because he's a mess who still has access. He's a made guy with a history, with grudges, with trauma, with substances, with a chip on his shoulder, and with the constant sense that his life didn't become what he wanted. That kind of person becomes dangerous in a quieter way, not always screaming. Sometimes just dead-eyed, offended by the world, and ready to do something permanent because he's tired of feeling temporary. You see how this plays out with civilians most clearly near the end, because that's where the show makes the point that Christopher's violence isn't contained. When he and Paulie kill the waiter after a restaurant dispute, it's a shocking reminder that civilian life is basically collateral in their universe. The waiter isn't a rival gangster. He's just a guy doing his job who made the mistake of confronting the wrong people at the wrong time. Christopher's role in that moment matters because it shows how quickly he can switch from normal conversation to murder over something that, in any sane world, is nothing. And because it happens in a mundane setting, it strips away any illusion that mob violence stays in mob spaces. And the JT Dolan situation is even nastier in a different way. That's not a battlefield either. That's a private room, a normal person, a conversation that should end with someone storming out or getting embarrassed, not someone dying. Christopher goes to him for validation, tries to confess, tries to be understood, and when he doesn't get the reaction he wants, the rejection becomes an insult, and the insult becomes lethal. That is Christopher's danger to civilians in its purest form. He doesn't just harm civilians because they're in the way. He harms them because he wants something from them emotionally, and when he doesn't get it, he punishes them. To a civilian, that's nightmare logic. You can't predict it. You can't negotiate it. You can't even see it coming because you might think you're just talking. So if you're asking why Christopher Moltisanti feels so dangerous and so scary, it's because he's the intersection where personal weakness meets organized power. He's got an impulse problem, a pride problem, a substance problem, and a validation problem, and the mob gives him money, weapons, protection, and status so he never has to truly fix any of them. He's not the most strategic villain in the show, but he might be one of the most frightening to be around because the line between Christopher the guy and Christopher the weapon is thin, and it gets thinner as the story goes on. And for civilians, that's the real horror. They don't live by his rules. They don't even know the rules exist, but they can still end up paying the price, just because Christopher had a bad second and needed someone nearby to make him feel big again.